Thursday, the 26th of September, says the big calendar on the wall. And here in the studio, the smiling faces of Tom Williams.
Hello, James.
That's just one of them. I'm not implying anything about Tom. And Liam Tharme's back. Hi, Liam.
Hello,
Lovely
James.
to see you.
Likewise.
Also with us again, tennis-loving Charlie Eccleshare.
Hello.
Hello, Charlie. Where have you been since we last had you on?
Well, I think when I was last on, I was on the way to the airport, or was halfway to the airport.
Which airport?
To the new, Heathrow, but to JFK. I was in New York for 2.5 weeks for the US Open.
Right.
Then I was in Berlin the weekend just gone.
Seen much football?
I've still managed to keep up with my beloved footy. So, yeah.
Okay.
That's
All
We'll
right.
soon find out, James.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll soon
Yeah.
find out.
Excellent. We had some tennis scores, actually, in the Carabao Cup midweek. I don't know if you saw. Liverpool
Not quite, but yeah.
5-1. Can you not win a set 5-1?
No.
Yeah. Leave the tennis to Charlie. That's the lesson
5-0.
here.
There was a 5-0. Chelsea against Barrow. Yeah.
Yeah. No, a healthy lead in a set, but crucially, 6 is the magic number.
I see where you're going with this, James, but having just looked at the scores, there literally wasn't a single tennis score in all the matches.
Last week.
We had a few 5s.
Yeah.
We had a 7.
Yeah.
Well, you could win 7, can't you?
You can win 7.
Yeah.
Not 7-0, though.
Only 7-5 or 7-6.
Not 7-0. And we, although
You can
there
win
is
7-0 in a tie.
well, it's not over because Newcastle AFC Wimbledon has been postponed.
There you go.
So maybe
Because
watch
of a
this.
sinkhole
Watch
in the
this,
pitch.
but
That's
yeah,
a tennis thing, isn't it?
remarkable.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah.
Who had a 7-0?
Manchester United and Barnsley.
Oh, yeah, but that was last
Oh, but last
week.
week, yeah. No, I'm just.
Yeah.
I wanted to check your tennis score reference against all the scores.
Yeah, now rubbishing your point of it, yeah.
Right.
It's fair enough.
In the Europa League, perhaps, because we had Europa League action, didn't we, confusingly, Liam?
It just rattled me a bit seeing Champions League on Thursday last week, Europa League sort of on the midweek this week. Just you suddenly look at the day and go, have I got the days of the week right?
Yeah.
It scared me a bit.
Shifting the goalposts. Yeah. We'll get on to that because, of course, Man United were involved. The other Premier League side, Spurs, will be in action tonight as we record a Thursday at home to Carabao before indeed going to Old Trafford. This Sunday, in one of the big Premier League matches, we've got Rodri, his absence to discuss. We've got the massive changes at Everton to talk about as well. Let's begin then with a quick roundup of the fixtures in Matchday 6. Saturday lunchtime, Rodri-less Man City visit Newcastle, who are just 3 points off the top of the table. At 3 o'clock, Arsenal, 2 points behind City, place Leicester, who had a bit of a rough midweek. We'll come on to that later on. Chelsea, who are in 5th place, play Brighton. Big game that for the South Coast side and their followers. There's a derby for Brentford and West Ham. Forest play Fulham. And Everton host Crystal Palace. At the end of what could be a very big week for the Toffees indeed. At 5:30, it's telly's on for Wolves-Liverpool, which is bottom of the league, against a side just 1 point off the top. 2 games on Sunday, that's Ipswich Villa at 2 and Man United Spurs at 4:30. And on Monday night, a South Coast derby as Bournemouth face Southampton. Woo. We're going to begin with Newcastle Man City and the news that's kind of dominated things since last Sunday, and that's Rodri's injury. This week, news that's been hailed by many as a key development in the Premier League title race. Rodri, who had just been saying that players maybe could strike because they're playing literally too much football, collapses with what the club think may be a season-ending knee ligament injury. Are Man City's prospects set to collapse with him? How big is this? The record is slightly conflicting of Man City without him because that was the narrative for so long that lose Rodri and you lose matches. In fact, I read that their points tally without him, their average points per game without him, if you extrapolate that for the rest of the season, would be enough only to see them reach 4th on last year's figures. However, is it not true at the start of the season that he missed a bunch of games because he picked up an injury in the European Championship final and they were absolutely fine?
Yeah, I think it's like last season it was really stark. He got a 3-game suspension for a red card against Nottingham Forest, and they lost all 3 of those games. One was in the Carabao Cup, so they were slightly under strength. It is huge. There's no getting away from it. It reminds me, and especially everyone's saying, Arsenal might be the big beneficiary. In '97, 27 years ago tomorrow, Roy Keane suffered an ACL injury, and linking it to City, that was Alf-Inge Haaland, who was famously stood over him. United lost their key central midfielder, and Arsenal went and won the league. And this time around, you feel like Rodri is as important to City as Keane was to that United team. I mean, he's probably the player. I think even Erling Haaland, they'd rather, if Pep had to decide on which player to do without.
God, that would be brutal, wouldn't it?
It would be, yeah.
Great television.
Yeah, it would.
Do that with every coach at the start of the season.
You have to have one player out.
Yeah.
Who would that? Or you have to keep one player. Who would it be? But, they managed to navigate without De Bruyne for big chunks of last season. He didn't play till January after the opening day.
How's he for this weekend, just while we're touching on KDB?
Well, Pep was saying it wasn't a bad injury. I think, to be honest, a lot of people thought he'd be fine for the Arsenal game. So, I mean, he hasn't really said, but he's just said it's not serious. And, Haaland was out of sections of last season too, and City have been amazing at navigating those sort of setbacks. Rodri is just so key to everything they do, and it will be interesting to what they do if they repurpose Rico Lewis and try and make him play that role, or whether Kovacic does a bit of it, Gundogan does a bit of it, but Rodri is just such a cut above.
Okay. Or Matheus Nunes is another one who was kind of touting himself, almost saying that he used to play pivot for Sporting Lisbon.
Yeah, it's.
I admire that.
Yeah,
I think he's probably fifth. He's probably fifth or sixth on the list.
Yeah.
But I played that.
I played that
kid,
and he said he'll have a go.
cashing in as well. I think the hardest part is when you mention about sort of Haaland and De Bruyne, that they're players that City have probably got, even if it's not stylistically the same type of player, quality replacements for. So in Alvarez and Foden especially, who had a great season last season, there's probably not the same sort of profile as Rodri in terms of the big guy, the ball winner. You've probably got smaller, more technical players, Luis Nunes that you mentioned. So I wonder whether that sort of leads Guardiola towards maybe sort of switching the system around a bit, or if we start to see more of we've had Guardiola moving into midfield as well, so whether that's something he doubles down on, or
Stones does that.
Yeah. So
What did he do in the 3 games earlier this season?
Well, Kovacic played there,
Right.
And Kovacic played really well, and he was playing the kind of the pure Rodri role. He was a single number 6 in front of the back 4. Okay, it was away at Chelsea, home to Ipswich, away at West Ham, I think. But he was brilliant. I mean, he was really impressive. Obviously, a different profile to Rodri, more of a ball carrier, not a kind of number 6 in the sort of Busquets, Rodri Spanish tradition. Obviously knows the role very well. Is an exceptionally good footballer. Doesn't have the same sort of physical attributes. I think doesn't have the same kind of tactical canniness. I suspect he'll be. I mean, he's the most obvious player to go for, given that when everyone's fit, he's generally not in the team. Like, I think he's probably the closest thing to a direct Rodri replacement. But yeah, as Liam was saying, do you reconfigure the midfield? Does John Stones step up a little bit more? And those Kovacic performances suggest that he is capable of doing that. But then, when the quality of the opposition increases, it's not a role that he has played in over any sort of sustained period of time in his career, so it would be a big ask for him, I think.
And the thing with Rodri is he just does it again and again and again. His availability, ironically, has been one of his big assets as well. He's played 50 or more times in 4 of his 5 seasons, and the one he didn't, he played 46. He's just always been there. And when did Rodri ever put in less than like a 7 out of 10 performance? And that's the thing. So I don't doubt that someone like Kovacic can come in and do that job. More than from time to time, but to keep doing it game after game after game. So I think Pep's just going to have to be creative. But he is the best manager at doing that. He's done that so many times. They went into that season 21-22. They spent the whole summer trying to get Harry Kane. So clearly that was how their whole game model was going to be based around having Harry Kane. They didn't get him. They didn't get a striker even. They then looked at others towards the end of that window. They didn't get one and won the league without a striker. So he can find solutions, but it's going to be a big challenge for him.
All right.
Should have kept Calvin Phillips.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Plug in and play replacement.
I mean, when you look at the fixture list, though, the Newcastle's quite daunting, right? As a game without Rodri away from home, you think you're going to probably get pressed quite high, quite aggressively. It's a game where you'll definitely have a an intense midfield battle. But beyond that, they've got a couple of what seem like fairly straightforward-ish Champions League games. They have Fulham at home, Wolves away, Southampton at home, Bournemouth away. So there's games in there where I think they'll expect to really control a lot of the ball. So I wonder if this is more of a medium to long-term thing that they'll worry about, because the style of game they'll be playing, they should really be dominating the ball in these upcoming matches.
And maybe get through to January and go back in for Guimaraes or somebody.
Zubimendi or someone like that. I mean, yeah, who knows? You'd think they have some. I mean, they made a huge set in Alvarez in the summer, so
wow,
and they're not short of cash, I believe. So
okay, they did concede 43 seconds after he went off against Arsenal at the weekend. Tom, is this the decisive moment in the Premier League title race?
I mean, we've been kind of wondering for a little while what it's going to take to derail Manchester City. Is it going to be the 115 charges and that case now beginning, and the sort of, the kind of consequences of that? Both the sort of the emotional toil of knowing that that's hanging over them, and the potential outcome of the hearings at the beginning of next year. Or is it going to be, I don't know, something else unpredictable, or is it going to be the loss of a key player? And it feels like this, as much as anything, is if anything is going to derail City, it would be, the loss of a key player.
This is the one thing that they
the
didn't
one
want
thing that they did. I mean, it kind of literally was the one thing they didn't want to happen. So it's I don't know.
Relegation to the.
I mean, apart from that, I'm not sure how it's affected the betting markets or anything, but it does feel like the kind of thing that is going to be, has the potential to sort of derail City's season, and it kind of it already feels like it's made the title race a little bit more competitive, because City have been dealt this really weighty blow early in the campaign at a time when their other rivals are generally ticking along a bit more comfortably.
They did get a win Tuesday without Rodri in the Carabao Cup third round. They faced Watford. Beat them 2-1. Before that, they'd had two straight draws between the visit of Inter in the Champions League and Arsenal, of course, at the weekend. Newcastle this time around, who've only won one of their last 33 meetings with Man City in the Premier League, but who are unbeaten since at home. Newcastle unbeaten at home since the last time City visited.
Wow.
When City
and
won 3-2.
that was a big comeback win, right? As
Yeah.
well. Later on, De Bruyne, I think, came off the bench.
De Bruyne,
exactly.
Yeah.
Late comeback.
Oscar Bob.
They've been quite entertaining, Newcastle City games at St James's Park the last couple of seasons.
Yeah,
it was
3-3
the season before
that. Was a great game.
Scraps, yeah.
And that kind of announced Newcastle as a
force,
as a coming force. Yeah. I mean, look, they will feel, if ever there's a reasonable time to play City, then it's straight after losing their arguably most important player, when they're slightly recalibrating, because I'm sure in a couple of months Pep will have galaxy brained some amazing solution, and suddenly we'll be saying, actually, will Rodri get back in the team given how well Rico Lewis is playing? So I think this is probably the moment Newcastle might sense they have half a chance. They also had their League Cup game postponed midweek, so they've had extra time to prep.
They've got Harvey Barnes on fire.
Harvey Barnes on fire, yeah. I mean, obviously City will still be the favourites, but that that feels like an interesting game all of a sudden.
Certainly does. That's the Saturday lunchtime kickoff. We'll look at what their rivals, teams like Arsenal and Liverpool, are up to very shortly, and also round up the other things that happened that you may have missed, listener, nor to you, in the Carabao Cup third round. Carabao Cup third round, you saw all of this, listener, but just for the others, let me run through the results. Man City, as mentioned, edged past Watford 2-1 at the Etihad. Aston Villa, same scoreline for them, as they beat Duncan Alexander's Wickham at Adams Park. Chelsea, 5-0 winners. Not enough to win you a tennis set, but enough to see them pass League Two Barrow at Stamford Bridge. Leicester were also facing a League Two side, Walsall, but they didn't have such an easy time of it. It was 0-0 after 90 minutes, with a mutinous mood building among the travelling fans. But Wales goalkeeper Danny Ward saving the day in the penalty shootout, saving 3 penalties out of 3, Tom.
Yeah, 3 almost identical penalty saves, and they all went low to his right. And 2 of them at least were really decent saves, like right in the bottom corner. And so Leicester won the penalty shootout by the rather unusual score of 3-0. But Danny Ward is not getting any league football. He's only getting a run out in cup games. So from a Welsh perspective, good to see him. Guaranteeing
keeping his hand in, literally,
quite literally keeping his hand in.
All right,
it's quite interesting because penalty shootouts, always did used to be talked about as this lottery and things like this. But this shootout and that Coventry one against United, really, you could
what
really.
What happened in the Coventry United one?
United won it with the Coventry missed a bunch. They missed either 2 or 3, but it kind of fell apart for them. And you really did see what felt like quite a noticeable difference in the kind of how much some of the players trusted their technique or didn't. Those in the Premier League compared to those in the Championship.
Right. Wednesday's action in the Carabao Cup saw Arsenal, who Leicester will be facing this weekend, playing the kids and tonking Bolton 5-1. The Gunners actually named 4 players younger than the Emirates Stadium.
That, to be honest, I saw that stat and that really brought it home to me because I still think of the Emirates Stadium as new.
Right.
I live right next to it, and it is, it is a big physical presence in my life, and it's still, it's the Emirates. Yeah, you kind of sometimes forget that they're not still playing at Highbury, and yet that there are footballers playing top level football who were born after the stadium opened. I find that
4 of
hard
them.
to get my head around.
The youngsters in question are Ethan Nwaneri, who's already the Premier League's youngest ever player, and went and scored a brace in his first start for the club. And then you had Jack Porter, is it? The 16-year-old keeper.
16-year-old goalkeeper. You don't get many 16-year-old goalies.
He was quite funny. He took a catch right at the end of the game, and he could have sort of started a counter if he'd wanted to, but instead he was grinning from ear to ear and just sort of collapsed on the ball to sort of allow him to himself to have his moment. And fair play to him.
Fair play.
16 playing in goal in that kind of game.
I realise there's a bit of jest with all this, but I think there's a really important point about Arsenal kind of need a generation of graduates to start coming through. Even if it's from the perspective of PSR and the City style, we'll develop these players or send them on loan and then they can be, assets to make money from. But obviously, more importantly, there was, the Nelson, Smith Rowe, Saka sort of era where you look at a lot of that now has sort of started to be disbanded. Behind Fulham, they had the second fewest minutes to under-21s in the Premier League last season. So I think they're still a team that a lot of people think about as a young team because they are, but they're sort of 2 or 3 seasons together now, or even longer than that, under Mikel Arteta. And look, you need that time to grow and you need players to mature in order to succeed. But I think you sort of need that, not necessarily squad churn in a sense, but those youngsters still sort of coming through to really sort of prop up the team as well, which has probably been my main critique of anything of Arteta in sort of recent.
Well, how appropriate that should come from you as well, Liam. You very much represent the fresh blood so badly needed by this age.
What's Highbury?
But it is kind of part. I kind of feel like there's this sort of steady evolution where we're all realising that Mikel Arteta might be a little less Pep Guardiola than we thought, and a little more Jose Mourinho, and not really being trustful of the kids feels quite Mourinho.
I mean, last season, Nwaneri got he got a few minutes as a sub, but other than him, Arsenal's youngest outfielder who played in the league was Saka, who's just turned 23. I mean, it's pretty striking. And you're right. I mean, sales like Smith Rowe enabled them to bring in someone like Marino. Basically, that's kind of funded them. And you look, there are players like Iwobi and whatever who Fulham. There was that Newcastle Fulham game had Willock playing, Iwobi playing, Smith Rowe, Nelson, all those guys who are obviously really, really good footballers, but maybe not quite at sort of going for the title level. Being able to make those sales is really important.
Okay. To complete the list of players younger than the Emirates Stadium who played there this midweek, you had Josh Nichols and, what's Lewis Kelly's first name? Miles Lewis Kelly. There you go. Also, Maldini Kakuri came on for his Gunners debut. Is he a left-back?
He's played centre-back.
Has he?
Yeah. Unfortunately.
Nice. Liverpool, also 5-1 winners. They did theirs against West Ham. Woo! They also went a goal down to the Hammers. But then...
Beautiful goal as well. A scuffed clearance by Wataru Endo that hit Jarell Quansah on the heel and bubbled into the net.
Magnificent.
But, they all count.
Nice.
And then Liverpool turned on the style up front with Diogo Jota getting a brace, Cody Gakpo also. Mo Salah came on, got on the score sheet. Edson Alvarez got sent off trying to stop Mo Salah. He will miss West Ham's game this Saturday against Brentford. Will West Ham miss him? Is another question.
I mean, on the evidence of the last two matches, and admittedly playing him at centre-back and asking him to practically man-mark Nicholas Jackson at the weekend, possibly not.
Okay.
Hang on, did that make sense? I feel like I lost that sentence.
No, that's absolutely right.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, that made sense to me.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then some.
Your disdain came through from us all there. Yeah. Made the point too.
West Ham. West Ham's run? Pretty worrying. Lost 3 and drawn 1. That was against Fulham. Of their last 4 games, in that time they've scored 2 goals and conceded 12. All right.
Well, as producer Charlie pointed out pre-show, they have only lost to teams that are quite good. I mean, they have played very badly, and it doesn't look like, the Lopetegui effect has sort of started at all. But the league games they've lost at home to Villa on the opening day, where they didn't actually play that badly, at home to Man City, who always beat them at London Stadium. I mean, the Chelsea game at the weekend was very poor, and then, got stuffed by Liverpool in the Carabao Cup, but then they got stuffed by Liverpool in the Carabao Cup last season.
So they did. What was the score that time?
Also 5-1.
Remarkable.
Also 5-1.
Remarkable. Well, anyway, they've got Brentford this weekend. Liverpool will take their free-scoring form to the Molineux Stadium, where they'll be facing Wolves, as you'd expect. Wolves, who lie bottom of the table, Premier League's joint worst defence, which has also just lost Yerson Mosquera, also to an ACL. Liverpool have won 14 of their last 15 Premier League meetings with Wolves. As for round 4 of the Carabao Cup, that's what you're really keen to hear. Who's got who?
Some good ties.
Do you like them? End of October, you have to wait until the end of October for these. There are, so far, 4 all Premier League games. Holders of Liverpool travel to Brighton. Spurs host Manchester City. Leicester travel to Manchester United, and Aston Villa welcome Crystal Palace. Brentford get Championship side Sheffield Wednesday, and Southampton take on Stoke. Arsenal are at home to penalty-taking Preston.
They're away to Preston.
Are they?
Yes.
Okay. And Chelsea will get either a visit to Newcastle or, rather more locally, AFC Wimbledon, who, as mentioned, had their game at the Cherry Red Stadium postponed this weekend because of a sinkhole in the pitch. Does that happen often? What was the last time?
You don't hear that word often.
Yeah.
Certainly not in this country. A sinkhole.
And the sinkhole-related postponement.
In our great league.
It looked a bit like a load of like bunkers from a golf course had just sort of sprouted in one corner of the pitch, which is, again, pretty unusual.
Right. The game postponed. It will be played now at Newcastle because it's going to be a while before the Dons pitch is.
I tell you what, 1980s Wimbledon would have absolutely loved playing on a pitch with a sinkhole in a corner. Can you imagine sending long balls into it and watching opposition fullbacks
players disappear,
sucked away to their death?
Yeah. Wow. Dramatic. Okay, let's get on to some Premier League fixtures. Man City facing that tough trip to Newcastle this weekend in the Premier League. Listener, we've just been mentioning the fact that Liverpool have got a trip to Wolves, who are propping up the table. What about Arsenal? They take on Leicester, who only just scraped past League 2 opposition in the Cup midweek. Arsenal themselves fresh from that 2-2 draw away to City at the Etihad. Liam, you've written this week about how to stop Arsenal's mighty corner goal-scoring record. What did you come up with?
Yeah, it's become quite a big piece actually with Ahmed Walid. A few things, and the first point's quite funny and sounds quite silly, but concede fewer corners.
How'd you do that?
Well, so the interesting example we sort of found was Liverpool were the one Premier League team that Arsenal faced every season since 2021-22, which is when Jova arrived, their set-piece coach. They're the only team to not concede a corner goal to Arsenal in the Premier League in that time. I think they have conceded off of a wide free kick maybe in a cup or in a league game, but no corner goals. And I think they'd conceded 17 corners in 6 games, which was like fewer than 3 a game. So it was a case of, okay, if you can press sort of high well enough and not have to sit in a low block, you should sort of concede fewer crosses and therefore give up sort of fewer corners. And obviously then they can be a better team in possession. So that part is harder for some teams to do who aren't quite as good. But in sort of the box itself, it was sort of how well you can protect your goalkeeper. And now it's a case of stopping William Saliba and Benjamin White, because it's sort of moved away from sort of White trying to bump into the goalkeeper to then both sort of rushing from a bit deeper and really pinning those zonal markers. We saw it at City where, they got close to them and just stopped them from jumping and getting in the way, so they clear that sort of space for Gabriel. So I think Aston Villa and Brentford had good examples of it last season, where basically their zonal markers were just fully grabbing and holding the players, so you kind of have to risk now conceding a penalty in order to really sort of stop them, because barring the occasional short corner, it's generally always in swings into the 6-yard box. So you say, okay, if ideally you've got a keeper that can come out, that can punch, that can catch. Alisson's a great example of that, which is why Liverpool have done well. But if you don't have that, then you say, okay, well, we need a mix of zonal guys who are going to jump and win the first contacts, and we need sort of good man markers, and typically the smaller guys. A lot of people say put your best centre-backs up against them, but the problem I think Spurs found this was when Romero was on Gabriel, as soon as he lost him, well then Romero's not in position to actually sort of head the corner clear.
Right, I see.
On the not conceding corners issue, are we getting close to a state of play akin to the Rory Delap long throw menace, where teams realised that the worst thing you could do at the Britannia Stadium in the Tony Pulis era was to concede a throw-in near your box? Are we going to see teams just like going the extra yard not to concede corners against Arsenal, because the terror that Arsenal corners represent is just so great?
But I was thinking that, but then because what was so weird about that Stoke thing was that teams were actively conceding corners over throws, which looks so mad. But there's not really.
Right?
I mean, what would you do? Concede a penalty? Just concede a penalty. Do not concede a corner.
Just pick the ball up, whatever it takes.
Just have your pen.
No corners.
I mean, that is incredible that only Liverpool and Liverpool did. They conceded from a free kick, even last season against them. But so that's amazing.
There are 5 teams, but 3 of them have been in the league for 1 season. Right. The other was Leeds, who were in there for 2 seasons. But they've scored, I think it's 19 of the 24 teams they've played against in the Premier League in 3 and a bit seasons under Yeovil they've scored against, which I think it's always interesting when you see the total amounts of, they've scored the most goals, but actually they can kind of do it against anyone. There's no silver bullet, if you like.
I think as well, there was a really interesting number. I think it was that in 13 games last season, Arsenal opened the scoring with a set piece. And if you think how important that first goal is, especially again, like this weekend, say Leicester's whole game plan really will be like, let's not concede. Let's try and stay in it for as long as possible. If you can open, and they might be doing a lot of teams have done a good job at not conceding from open play, but if you can have that to open up a game, it just makes such an enormous difference.
And it is genuine. Sorry, go on, Charlie.
No, I was going to say there's something so weird about set pieces, because so when they're working, you're kind of like, how do you stop them? And then you're like, why doesn't every team just kind of do it? Like, it seems, because obviously we don't see all the work that goes into it, there's something both incredibly sophisticated, but also quite simplistic and relatable about just get a guy who's got really good delivery, like Saka, and have some big units at centre-back. And it's this really interesting combination of incredibly modern and sophisticated and also quite rudimentary.
And it is genuinely remarkable, I think, that Arsenal have managed to find this advantage by deliberately targeting set pieces and working on them in a very specific way. They've managed to give themselves a weapon that none of their rivals have to quite the same extent. And you suspect that in time, the rest of the Premier League and the rest of football will kind of catch up and will find a way to make Arsenal less effective, and will come up with their own very effective corner routines. But I feel even in like the sort of modern development of football, what Arsenal are doing is really, really interesting.
Are they not continuing the kind of fine work of missionary Big Sam at Blackburn back in the day?
I mean, it's not dissimilar.
But what I don't know, and Liam, you might have a better sense of this, is every team working as hard as Arsenal at it, they're just not as good? Or are other teams just not working as hard? Or is it a combo? I mean, I guess we don't really know.
Don't sort of say bit of both. Yeah. I think the interesting thing about Arsenal is how they're quite predictable or consistent in terms of they almost always go for in-swingers. There's a few short corners against sort of bigger teams. But it's a case of having quality takers, right? Fundamentally, if you haven't got a player that can put it consistent where you need to. That was one of the England things with Alan Russell, I think, and the bus stop that they had. He was saying that, we've got the targets to hit, but really the players need to consistently hit the same zones with the corners. And then have you got enough players? And now you look at Saliba, White, Havertz, Gabriel, that's at least 4 players that can all be realistic targets and can score goals. So you say, okay, we've got enough guys that sort of one-on-one, and it's interesting because Gabriel's win percentage of aerial duels in the final third isn't that high. he's not actually that good compared to someone like a Van Dijk or perhaps a Botman or a Schär, but clearly gets enough of these situations that it makes it count eventually. And that's one of the things that stood out was Arsenal don't always score the first or second corner in the game, but by the time they get sort of later and they've had sort of 5 or 6, because they're doing sort of the same routines, you go, well, you've had a couple sighters, you'll get it right eventually. But I think it's been a title-winning tool for a while now. City, in for a few seasons under Guardiola, consistently were sort of top of the set-piece table, if you like. Liverpool definitely when they won the league. So,
I mean, as well, because the most dominant teams tend to get a lot of corners.
Exactly,
like it's often quite a good indicator of territorial domination, etc. If you're counting the opposition half, should say as well, like, as much as it sounds easy to put in a good cross, the margin is so teeny tiny, and especially when you've got teams like City put Haaland basically to block the front post, and that's what you often see. How can you not beat the first man? Is such a common thing. It's because you're hitting it at such pace, and there is this teeny gap that you go for where basically the vast majority of corner goals are scored from. So that's the place they're aiming for, and if you get it a tiny bit wrong, it's just going to the first defender's head, and they can clear it. So it is a very small margin for error, and I guess Saka and Rice, Rice on the other side, they've obviously worked at that incredibly hard.
Wow, rough weekend in prospect perhaps for Leicester. Leandro Trossard, by the way, is available for this match after serving his suspension from last Sunday in that 5-1 midweek win over Bolton. Owen Roberts saying, with yellow cards so easy to accumulate now, Owen perhaps an Arsenal fan, what are your feelings on 3 yellows for a red instead of 2? That's
madness. No. You're talking about
Sorry,
Owen.
No,
though I do wonder, with kicking the ball away, that feels quite a sort of sin binny type offence.
What happened to the sin bin? We were going to see sin bin in some non-league arena, I think. No.
Yeah, there was talk of that, and you get sin bin at amateur football now.
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
it's for those sorts of offences. Okay. It's for things like dissent or kicking the ball away.
Petulance.
I think the kicking the ball, the fact that you get a ban, so I think you can miss like a game and a half for kicking the ball away. Well, as in you miss half of the game, and then a suspension as well.
That would be mad.
Sorry,
That's good.
And I think we'll be seeing so-and-so in the second half, of course, after he kicked the ball away last Tuesday.
I think the fact that you get the red and then the ban, I think, is why people feel kicking the ball away feels overly harsh.
There you go. Well, yeah, I mean,
but 3 yellows.
Fundamentally, don't kick the ball away. It also feels to me a little bit like what happened at the beginning of. Was it last season with the ridiculous stoppage time? And it was like, this is good. We're clamping down on time wasting. Time wasting must stop. And this is how serious we are. Right. There are going to be 17 minutes of stoppage time in every Premier League game until you're all sick of it. And then they just kind of stopped. And at some point, I suspect they will get a little bit more lax on time wasting. And I think it helps
often
PG
within
Mol.
the same game.
Often within the same game. But I mean, it probably helps PG Mol that they've had these 2 very high-profile cases, unfortunately, both affecting the same club within the space of sort of 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Obviously Declan Rice and Trossard, but it's they are trying to get a message across, aren't they?
They certainly are.
And a message that, to echo Liam, I wholeheartedly support.
There you go. Let's move on. Next up, Everton. Everton, everybody. On Monday, a statement confirmed that the Friedkin Group, that's a name, not an adjective, had reached an agreement to purchase a majority stake in Everton, a club that have been waiting a long time to see their parlous off-field situation resolved. So is that long wait over? And what impact can supporters expect? And when? Who else to answer those questions but Matt Slater? Thank you for joining us, Matt.
Yes, there's a lot of questions there. Which one would you like me to answer?
Well, is
first?
it done? And is it good news?
Okay, is it done? Nearly done. Certainly done in terms of the agreement between Farhad Mashiri and the Friedkin Group. They've managed to wrap that up pretty fast. It obviously now all depends on regulatory approval. We've talked about this, I think, in the past. Sort of 3 people have to sort of give this the nod. They are in sort of order of importance, going from not that important to most important. The FA, the Financial Conduct Authority, those 2 are kind of box-ticking exercises, just about suitability to operate in the UK. And then the last one's the Premier League. I don't think the Friedkin Group are going to have any troubles here at all. They are very rich. They have no criminal convictions. They have gone through regulatory processes before. They're going to be fine. It takes 8 to 10 weeks. There is a bit that might take a tiny bit longer, although the very fact they have come out and announced this deal is done makes me think they've done a lot of this work already. And that is to do, it's a bit complicated, so I'll do it as quickly as I can. Do you remember the whole kerfuffle around 777 Partners? Those ridiculous people that wasted a lot of time trying to buy Everton. They lent Everton a lot of money, about £200 million. Now, that loan is sort of sitting there. In the meantime, 777 have basically gone bankrupt, and their main creditor, an insurance firm called ACAP, have claimed all of their assets. All the various things that 777 did. There's lots of stuff, lots of it loss-making. However, both 777 and ACAP are being sued for a huge amount of money by a London-based investment firm called Leadenhall. Now, that is the subject of court proceedings in New York. Leadenhall have an injunction over ACAP's business, basically. It means that ACAP can carry on being an insurance firm, but if it wants to dispose of any 777-related assets, it has to run it past the court first. So it can't just do a fire sale of 777 stuff to fill its own pockets, because it might owe Leadenhall money. That is yet to be resolved. So that bit, this Everton loan, if Friedkin wants to come along and settle it, and he most certainly does, he just needs to run it past the court first, and Leadenhall have to say, yeah, we're okay with that. So that's a little wrinkle. I think the fact there's so much confidence around the deal makes me think that they've done this deal and they're going to be fine. But those are the bits.
Okay, we're unlikely from what you're saying, though, to see any impact in the short term, more towards the end of the year and perhaps with the January market and prospect.
Yeah, I think that's the point. I mean, that's one of the reasons I think the Friedkins have come back. They were here in June. They looked at Everton and then they walked away in July because they had concerns. Their number one concern was that 777 loan, which they've clearly resolved. I think a combination of, we're sort of halfway in. We've already lent £200 million ourselves to Everton. Maybe John Textor's interest, which was very high profile. I think it was a little bit remote, to be honest. But I think maybe that has sort of poked them a little bit. And I think, as you say, look, if we're going to do this, we need to be in place by Christmas so we can possibly buy players in January, because the last thing we want is Everton not in the Premier League. So there's no point doing this in February when we can't do much about it. So I think it's those things that have got us to this point.
Okay. There are US owners, or there have been US owners in the Premier League, and there have been US owners in the Premier League with very different impacts on the fortunes of the clubs they've owned. The Friedkins have done well by many standards at Roma, for example. Do you regard them as a good thing for Everton fans?
Well, I do. I mean, you're the real expert on Italian football. I mean, I've obviously sort of followed. Don't shake your head. I've obviously followed what they've been up to, and my take is that they, a little bit like the situation they're walking into. There were financial issues, and they achieved immediate success. They've had a good sort of spell in Europe. I think they've been to 4 straight semi-finals. They've won a trophy. They lost in the final of another. They haven't done it domestically. Very frustratingly for them, they keep missing Champions League football, which I think is one of the reasons why the financial issues there are still a little bit problematic. Their main problem in Rome, as far as I can tell, is the stadium, and it's been the problem for probably 1,000 years or more. But it's just building stuff in Rome is difficult, and building stuff in Italy is pretty hard. So they have that big headache, and of course then they've slightly compounded things by sacking a legend and doing it badly. So they're a low ebb. I think it's probably fair to say, in their time in Rome. But I think if I was to look at the whole piece, it's been pretty good. They've certainly spent money.
Right.
So if I was an Evertonian, I'd be thinking, this lot are going to spend money.
Okay, and you make the point about the stadium, which I can't. If I had a pound for every time I've seen a picture of a Roma owner putting the spade in the earth for the first step towards building the new ground, I'd be like £4 or £5 up, which would be fantastic. But that's not an issue they're going to have with Everton, because Bramley Moore Dock is going to be online very, very shortly. Fantastic.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the, that is the reason I think that they're buying Everton, because there are plenty of other Premier League clubs for sale. I mean, Everton, of course, have a great history and a fan base. Yes, that makes them attractive, but there are loads and loads of problems. They're loss making. They've been through, 2, 3, 4, depends who you ask, relegation scrapes. It's not looking that wonderful this season. They got top dot points last season. So there are lots of problems. They are. It's a distressed asset. They're walking into a smouldering building. However, the good bit is Farhad Mashuri has pretty much built them a stadium, a really good stadium. It's only got 50, 60 million to spend on it just to fit it out. So yeah, great. That goes back to my other answer though, that it's not going to be that wonderful if it's in the Championship.
True.
It needs to be hosting Premier League football at the start of next season.
All right. Matt Slater, thank you so much for that. You can hear more of Matt, of course, on the Athletic FC podcast. Thank you, Matt. Brilliant stuff.
No problem at all.
Everton this weekend taking on Crystal Palace. Ooh. In the John Texter, this is what you could have had, Classico.
Is also the team who haven't led yet versus the team who often lead but never win. Classico. Palace are the last team in the Premier League who are still to take the lead in the game. Everton have taken the lead in each of their last 3 games. 2-0 up at home to Bournemouth, 2-0 up away at Villa, 1-0 up away at Leicester, and have come out of that with the sum total of 1 point.
1 point.
It looks like Jared Branthwaite might be back this weekend. He played 90 minutes for Everton's under-21s last weekend, so that would be another bit of good news.
Yeah, there you go. Long overdue. That's 3 o'clock Saturday, the Everton Palace game. Sunday afternoon, probably the standout fixture of round 6 is Man United Tottenham. Both teams were involved in Europa League action, or are in Europa League action this midweek. Spurs, in fact, go tonight, as we mentioned earlier, in the Europa League, Thursday as we record. But United, on Wednesday, got a visit from the Dutch side, FC Twente. So many emotions, memories for Ten Hag as he faced the team where he played and coached for so many years. Tom, you watched this. Last season, of course, the European campaign for United was one of the big disappointments. But this time round, in an easier tournament against easier opposition, I imagine they absolutely smashed it, did they?
Well, I mean, no, they didn't. And it was ultimately quite a frustrating evening. Started the game pretty well, as they had at Palace at the weekend. Christian Eriksen puts them ahead 10 minutes before first half.
Some of those Rashford moves as well.
Yeah, Rashford looked in really good form. Nice link-up with Joshua Zirkzee while the two of them were on the pitch. And one absolutely exquisite flip-flap nutmeg on Ricky van Wolfswinkel.
Was it on Van Wolfswinkel?
It was indeed on Van Wolfswinkel. So there were signs of progress in United's play. And I actually think that in terms of their football, they look a bit more coherent than last season. I thought this during the game against Palace at the weekend. I thought this watching them last night. They've got this structure when they're building up. Diogo Dalot moves into midfield, gives them a sort of 3-2-5 shape. They're holding onto the ball a bit better. They're moving it down the pitch a bit better. I think a partial consequence of that is that they're giving up fewer chances. Like their sort of underlying defensive stats are much better than last season. They couldn't have got much worse in terms of the number of chances they conceded, but they do appear to have addressed that.
So how come they drew this 1-1?
Well, so they were actually looking relatively comfortable. The problem they had was that they weren't taking any of their chances. And I think this is an issue because they've currently got Zirkzee leading the line, who has never been a prolific goal scorer and probably never will be. Marcus Rashford, who remains in this career-defining funk, albeit having scored 3 goals in his previous 2 games. Amad Diallo started again on the right. He's not going to score that many goals. Bruno Fernandes is shooting as much as he ever does. Is not scoring at the moment. And so they didn't take the opportunities they had to kill the game off. And then with, about 20 minutes to go, I forget which player it was now, one of the Twente players sort of kind of barrels deep into United territory, and United snuff out the danger, and Christian Eriksen finds himself with the ball at his feet but has his pocket picked by Sam Lammers, who runs in and curls a shot past Onana at his near post. And United had a bit of a go at the end. Twente keeper made a couple of really good saves, but yeah, ultimately a frustrating outcome. But my feeling is that they are looking better.
Okay, the results not so much. 0-0 against Palace and 1-1 against Twente. Spurs at the weekend, Charlie.
Yeah, and Højlund coming back as well, which may make a difference, depending on your sort of perspective on him. But yeah, they've got 3 big games. I mean, they've got Spurs the weekend, then Porto away, Villa away next week. I think this is going to be such an interesting game, United Spurs. 2 teams that we're still sort of working out how they've started the season, that you could kind of make the case for either way, I guess. And they're probably operating in quite similar place in the league right now. So yeah, I'm really curious to see how this plays out. I mean, last season this fixture was a 2-2 draw. Spurs were pretty badly hit by injuries then, and Spurs beat United 2-0 right at the start of the season. But United had quite a few chances. So yeah, I think this could be really entertaining. And for Spurs, their away form has not been good for a while. They really need to go out and put in a good performance against one of their rivals. One of their only away wins in the last, pretty much this calendar year was away at Villa, who are one of their rivals. So they'll feel they could, they have that in their locker, so to speak.
Although Old Trafford, historically, such a difficult place for them.
It's not been a happy hunting ground.
Not a happy hunting ground, indeed. Raphael Varane, on a kind of United-related note, who featured in their FA Cup winning match at the end of last season. That's actually now the final game of his career because he suffered a knee injury in a Coppa Italia match earlier this season for Como, the side that he'd moved to. And has this week decided that at 31, it's as he puts it, I've fallen and risen 1,000 times, and this time it's the moment to stop and hang up my boots with my final game, winning a trophy at Wembley. It is with immense pride and a feeling of fulfillment that I am announcing my retirement from the game that we all love. There you go. I wanted to go out strong. He says lots of things, but it's all good stuff.
Technically speaking, his final game was the one for Como where he limped off after 20 minutes. But let's overlook that.
It's final.
I think that's really harsh.
The body's warm, Tom.
No, it is. No, it is. No. In fairness,
You're only saying what everyone was thinking.
Yeah, but no. In fairness, he will go down as one of France's greatest ever defenders, one of the most decorated French footballers of all time, 4 Champions Leagues, the World Cup. And he's kind of done everything in his career quite early. He made his debut for Lens when he was 17. Yeah. He went to Real Madrid when he was 18 or 19, I think, immediately goes into the first team and is a kind of cornerstone alongside Sergio Ramos in that stupendously successful Real Madrid team. Announced his international retirement when he was only 29, and now has announced his proper retirement at the age of 31. But I think ultimately his body had just let him down. United fans will know that he was very frequently injured. He's had knee problems. He's had muscular problems. And I think he was hoping that, that Como would give him an opportunity to sort of play at obviously they're going to be scrapping for their lives in Serie A, but it kind of felt like a sort of a pre-retirement move. And in the end, it was a pre-retirement move, albeit one that lasted about 20 minutes in terms of, actual football play.
Sadly, Como, who this week had a huge win against Atalanta, 3-2, massive, their first victory of the season. Now, there's other stuff coming up this weekend in the Premier League, and in the final part, we'll do that in a bit of an On This Day. You an On This Day fan listener? I know I am. Today, as we record this, it's the 26th of September, and on this day, in 1998, Charlie Eccleshare, it was Sheffield Wednesday against Arsenal. Sheffield Wednesday's Paolo Di Canio shoving referee Paul Alcock, who did his best to stay upright, valiantly. He tumbles over. There's this magnificent moment when Nigel Winterburn comes over and gives Paolo Di Canio some. Paolo raises an eyebrow in his direction, which is followed by Nigel executing the fastest retreat since. Yeah. And yes, there you go.
The funny thing about that is that you watch the footage now and it looks hilarious. Yeah. Everything is hilarious. The push is hilarious. Paul Alcock falling over is hilarious. The Winterburn thing is hilarious. But at the time, it felt so serious.
Yeah.
Like Di Canio already had like a long rap sheet, and now he has pushed one of the Queen's referees. This is an outrage. Right. This Italian madman needs the book throwing at him.
Do you remember there was then an amazing thing? Di Canio went into hiding, or in inverted commas, in Rome, and Rob McCaffrey, do you remember him? The really big guy who did You're on Sky Sports was sent to track him down for Sky. And so you've got McCaffrey kind of winding through these Roman back streets trying to find him. I think he does eventually. It's like, Paolo Di Canio is living a quiet life out here. He doesn't want to be bothered. He just wants to reflect on what's happened. And it's very. It was this huge thing, that Di Canio went. It was like he was living in exile. The shame of pushing Paul Alcock,
Right.
And Rob McCaffrey was the man to bring him home.
There you go. £10,000 he was fined. He picked up an 11-game ban, and that all happened.
Has anyone pushed a referee since? No, they have not.
Yeah,
There you go.
like
So,
Well, actually,
yeah.
I bet a lot of players have.
Exactly.
that's what we want to see clamped down.
Yeah.
on.
Good. Anyway, Ipswich Villa this weekend. Oh, did you know that in the 1980-81 season, these two teams were the top two in English football? Another world, eh? Another world.
European Cup giants.
Yeah. Currently, they're not. Villa aren't far off. They're in third place. Ipswich, though, in 17th spot. So there you go. That's coming up, that fixture. What time's that? Oh, 2 o'clock on Sunday. 2 o'clock on Sunday. Could be an interesting game. That's two interesting managers. We'll be reflecting on that, of course, in Sunday night's Totally Football show. But right now, I wanted to, Liam, ask you about a game coming up Saturday afternoon at Stamford Bridge. It's Chelsea against Brighton. How big a game now is this for Seagulls fans after all the poaching that they've been doing down your way?
There's probably a divided fan base on it. I probably consider myself more unbothered by it in the sense that that's the nature of football, and that players and staff move, obviously not typically in sort of that big volumes all at one go. There's definitely fans that will, I think, have more animosity towards Chelsea for taking players and taking staff. I think it's also interesting because there was a period where Brighton quite consistently got results against Chelsea. They did the double over them in 2022-23, but then last season lost all three games, all by a marginal goal, obviously 2 in the league and once in the cup. So it was a team that Brighton went from struggling against in the Premier League when Chelsea were just a big club when they came in, to Chelsea obviously having a couple of poor seasons, and Brighton capitalised on that, and then it kind of went back last season. So it'll be interesting because sort of stylistically it's going to probably be quite a high line from Brighton up against a team in Chelsea who are now obviously trying to play quite a positional style under Maresca and exploit that. So it should probably be quite entertaining, definitely a stars make fights game.
Are you surprised at how well Chelsea have been doing under Maresca?
No, I don't think so.
A lot of people before the season started felt that he was very one-dimensional and that would soon be found out at the higher level.
Well, it's funny because they haven't really been one-dimensional. If you look at their counter-attacking stats, they're the best counter-attacking team in the league this season. I think they've scored 6 times from it and had 20-odd shots, which both are the most in the league. And it's something I did a piece on earlier this week with Cole Palmer and Nicholas Jackson, of two players who just thrive with that time and space. They're both really versatile. Either one can be the passer, either one can be the runner. So they've really sort of carved apart some teams, admittedly more so when they're leading in games or already ahead. But there's been some great moves already this season. I think the Palace counter-attack, the third goal against West Ham. So it's quite ironic because I think Maresca came out after the West Ham win and sort of said, actually, we're still rushing a bit too much in attack. And I thought, when you've got players that are going to work a certain way, I'm all for having a style and a way of playing, but I think you need to sort of fit that to the players as much as fitting the players to the style.
Okay. Brighton have yet to lose a game this season under your young manager. How much older is he than you?
About 7 years, I think.
Wow.
7 years, maybe 8 years. Yeah.
Wow. So how would you reckon on his start to the season? Are you surprised by that?
No, because Brighton ironically tend to start seasons quite well. Is been a trend was under De Zerbi when he came in. Obviously in the season, Potter, even under Houghton for a few seasons. And the quality of squad now and the recruitment they did, sure, there's the argument that takes time to actually get the players used to the system, used to the way of playing. But for the players that are still there, it's not a massive move away from how De Zerbi wanted to play. I think it's a little bit more balanced and not quite as extreme all the time, but a lot of the abiding principles look the same. I think there's been... The unbeaten thing's interesting because there's probably been a couple of poor home draws in the last 2 games, excluding the Carabao Cup and over Wolves. But it's interesting, they're definitely more solid defensively, which they've managed to build that base, which De Zerbi just never really had, to be honest. He was too focused on scoring goals at one end to care about what was happening the other way. So I think the big test will come when they play more... I think just generally better teams. They've had quite a balanced start to the season. So Chelsea and teams with... Good counter-attacking players and top-attacking teams will be a real test, because it's one thing, I think, doing a high line at home to Ipswich, with all due respect, going to the Etihad and doing it, or insert other example here, are very different prospects.
Okay. Brighton currently lying 7th in the table. You're only 1 win off 3rd. I mean, it's early days, isn't it? Chelsea 1 point better off in 5th. Did anybody else want to jump in on this, or shall I move on to other games?
No, I just think this is another game like the United Spurs one that looks really interesting.
Okay, can't watch it. It's 3:00 on Saturday afternoon.
No, you definitely can't.
Oh, you can if you're in France.
Or
Rub
if
it
you're in Stamford Bridge.
Or if, of course, lest we forget.
Similarly, geo-specifically available is Nottingham Forest against Fulham, Saturday at 3:00. Forest unbeaten.
They look really good.
Unbeaten.
I've really enjoyed Forest this season. I think I really like Chris Wood as well. I think he's fantastic. The three they've got playing behind him, the speed at which they attack, really nice sort of combinations.
Although they won't have Morgan Gibbs-White in there
No,
this
they
time.
won't.
As will Nuno Espirito Santo after the fracas last weekend against Brighton. But Brighton manager, and this is breaking news, Liam, Fabian Hürzeler will be available because he was only red carded for going onto the field but not abusing anyone. So he's been,
within the laws of the game. Well, to be fair, from what I've heard, I think he got sent off a few times in the side of Bundesliga last season. So I don't think it'll be long before maybe he says something that gets him in trouble.
Okay, Forest Fulham, everybody.
Yeah, no, as Liam said, I think Forest are really fun side to watch. They feel like possibly the last pure counter-attacking team in the division because West Ham were quite counter-attacking under David Moyes, but Julen Lopetegui is trying to turn them into something a bit different. So Forest are this sort of, I wouldn't say they're a throwback team, but they have this very set way of playing. They defend pretty deep, big hulking centre backs, Alanga and Hudson-Odoi on the wings. Morgan Gibbs-White pulling the strings, albeit not this Saturday, and then Chris Wood up front. And won away at Liverpool recently. Perhaps slightly fortunate to get a draw against Brighton on the balance of play, but took their chances very well. And still unbeaten.
I mean, Alanga, you're a sprintman. He's got to be right up there, hasn't he, for quickest players in the league?
Pretty quick.
Van der Ven, surely. Yeah.
Van der Ven's probably
it's
top.
Also
he's
measuring them over.
Yeah.
Bring
problem,
back sprinting competition.
That would genuinely be
Top level
amazing.
play. Can you
It would be
imagine?
so cool.
See, I
Who
make
else
the
is
argument
there?
that 60 metres would be more insightful than 100
Yes.
because it's probably a bit too far.
Right.
So a pitch is about 100 metres just over, give or take. So you're talking like a just over half the length of the pitch.
Yeah.
Or
Okay.
From centre circle on the opposition side to your own sort of goal line.
It would be one of the coolest if they tracked the fastest top speed, the 8 or however many, and then
how
did
do
a
they do it at the
60-metre
moment?
dash.
There's cameras.
No, I think that is how they do it, but I'm saying
there's-
then take that on and actually have a race between all of them, the top
It's like
8.
with hurdles and sinkholes and stuff.
I think fewer sinkholes. I think we've had enough
In
sinkholes.
costumes,
It's just a steeplechase.
Yeah, steeplechase.
Right. Okay. Well, that is Forest and Fulham, who've actually won more league fixtures against Forest than they have against any other opponent in their history.
I found that a really
Meaningless statistic?
like meaningless, but also kind of surprising.
Championship for a lot of the time together, right? Like that. I don't know. Maybe show my age. But.
Oh, here's a note for you. Since Nuno took over, a little bit under a year, he came in on December the 23rd last year. In the time since, only 5 players in the Premier League have scored more goals than Chris Wood.
Yeah, I mean, they're probably rely on him quite a bit as well. So it's probably a situation where they need him to put up a lot of goals. I think the front three, was it maybe Alanga last season who assisted him quite a few times. So, they've got players that can cross for him, that can provide cutbacks. I think it's funny because it's probably a way of playing in terms of what we were saying about the counter-attack that is increasingly quite suited when a lot of teams, now we're talking about Chelsea, West Ham, pretty much every team wants to play a possession style of football, wants to sort of play out short. And if you are then good at doing this, naturally, it's going to suit you a lot of times to say we can sit off and we can counter-attack. It might limit where you can come in the league because you're playing a bit more sort of reactively rather than proactively. But I think there's a base to build from. I think I enjoy what they bring, I think, in terms of a different style.
Okay, for now they lie 8th alongside Brighton on 9 points, and that's remarkably close to those Champions League positions. The other 2 games this weekend, Saturday at 3 o'clock, Brentford against West Ham. Big question there, can Brentford score after 23 seconds for the 3rd game in a row?
They probably don't want to. I mean, it hasn't done too much for them.
Definitely too early to
say. Way too early.
But this time against West Ham, whose recent record we mentioned earlier on, they might fancy their chances a bit more. And then on Monday night, Bournemouth against Southampton.
Nice to have a Monday night game.
Is it?
Yeah, there haven't been many.
Okay.
Because of the double League Cup week has
Europe as well.
Yeah, double League Cup, double Europe.
The Europe
So you'll have Bournemouth
Yeah.
against Southampton on Monday, and that'll be followed by a Champions League with Arsenal PSG, amongst other delights.
We don't want to have a night without.
No. Not sure what's happening on Friday, Charlie. There'll be something in one of the foreigners, I imagine.
Sure.
This
Yeah.
Friday?
Yeah.
Spoiled for choice this Friday, James,
Oh,
in
yeah?
the shape of not one but two Ligue 1 matches, one after the other.
Oh, yeah.
Auxerre Brest at 6 o'clock, and then PSG Rennes.
Okay.
PSG who dropped points against Reims last weekend for the first time this season.
Indeed,
Great
they
start to
did.
the season though, post Killian.
Playing some good stuff.
no
Milan
Kylian, no
Lecce,
problem.
Plymouth Luton.
Dortmund Bochum.
fixtures, listener.
Fixtures.
Dudes could just sit around
Anyway.
with
Yeah.
football players and or teams.
Let's finish there, shall we, for this Totally Football show. Thank you so much to Tom and Liam and Charlie, and to Matt Slater, and to Liam and producer Charlie, and you, listener. Sunday night, we're back to review what's happened so far in Matchday 6. Do join us for that. For now, from all of us here, it's goodbye. The Totally Football Show podcast is available 3 times a week, bringing you all the football news you could reasonably be expected to care about. We've got views, we've got stats, we've got analysis, we've got some of the best football writers around, and the whole thing is absolutely free. So have a listen on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or all the usual places by clicking on the link below.